Hello and welcome to another episode of the Backlot 605's box office episodes that we got for you here. Joining me as always is Derrick Veurink. How you doing this afternoon, this evening?
Yes, this evening. Doing great. Doing great.
Good, good.
Just got out of my screening of Licorice Pizza 20 minutes ago, and I'll tell you, folks, it is a very enjoyable movie, so don't pass it up if you have the chance. And that giddiness will hopefully come into play with my presence here, so we'll see what happens.
Well, here's hope. I mean, I myself, I think it looks like a very interesting film. It's something I've definitely looked forward to. Hopefully, being able to get a chance to see. Hopefully, with the way that the box office is this weekend coming up, whatever. Hopefully, have it a little, at least a few legs for a little bit here. So,
Yep.
we'll kind of see how that goes because if there's one thing Licorice Pizza did have going for it is that it did, of course, have to go up against one of the biggest movies of 2021
If not
um,
all time.
of all time, right? And that is, of course, a Spider-Man: A No Way Home, coming in at number one again this week at $81.5 million, and that's saying something concerning the fact you've got in here. It's a 69% drop.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about it a couple ways. The first thing is, as we talked about last week, demand was huge for this movie. Excitement was high for this movie. It was going to be very front loaded no matter what. And
Yep.
so even with Christmas, and the holidays and people being able to get out to the theater on this holiday weekend, there was still going to be a drop off no matter what.
Right.
And the other thing we should kind of mention out here is, this was Christmas weekend. In particular, Friday was Christmas Eve,
Hmm.
which is usually where you see a dip in the box office because most theaters actually do close early, like in mid afternoon or in the evening, to let their families go home or let their employees go home to spend Christmas Eve with their families before popping right back up. So you're seeing a little bit of depression with that,
Yep.
but still, I mean, this is still a huge number, no matter what. Again, we're looking at a total here of nearly $500 million in the U.S. alone in 10 days during the resurgence of COVID.
Hmm.
It's doing incredible business, no matter how you slice it. So,
Definitely. Sony and Marvel are definitely thinking, well, I think we made at least a good choice in making sure they, push this back. Plus, I mean, clearly, obviously, if you push one MCU movie back, you got to push them all back because there's a through line.
well, and that's a bit of a tricky part because Black Widow and Eternals, they were in the can. Shang-Chi, I know, shut down production due to
Hmm.
COVID. This is the first MCU movie that was actually fully filmed during the pandemic. It started late last year, continued through spring of 2021. So the fact that they kind of, have been able to put this together on a pretty accelerated time frame,
Hmm.
given the situation, is actually pretty darn impressive. So
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with that, especially like you said, that it was done completely in, you know, post the having they having to figure out new ways to make movies nowadays because they can't do it in the old conventional way they did before.
yeah,
So yeah, and you just like last week here, you did provide us some good little tidbits here for the sake of the Spider-Man here in week two. So what, the 19th movie of all time after 10 days? That's pretty good considering, again, like we said, COVID.
yep. And I wouldn't be surprised if by this time next week, when we do next week's show, it'll actually be in the top 10.
Hmm.
To get into the top 10, it would have to make a little over 600 million total. And obviously, a lot of people are off work, kids are off of school this week. So
Yep.
it's going to make a lot of money every single day leading into New Year's weekend. So keep an eye on that stat because we'll have more to say about that in the future here. So,
Hmm. And I guess we did talk a little bit about this here about regards to where it was falling in all time here, but you know to basically only have two current generation Star Wars movies to basically take care of the Christmas holiday. So I mean it's in relatively good company. Granted, it's all Disney company, but
yep.
it's all good company.
Yep. I mean, Force Awakens, that movie performed unlike anybody else. Again, that is still the number one movie of all time in the US. So that was a once in a lifetime phenomenon right there, but it's still pretty close behind Rise of Skywalker, which again was only 2 years ago. So
Hmm.
you think about how well we've recovered to pre-COVID times, essentially, at least with this particular movie, that is.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And we looks like we hear is that Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man, had a $403.71 million box office and whatnot. And now, are you talking the same 10 days, or are we talking just
No,
simply in its
that
total run? So in
that
10
is
days, this one
yeah,
has beat the entire run of the original Spider-Man.
yes, that is the total run. In fact, one fun stat: the 2002 Spider-Man was the very first movie to make over $100 million in its opening weekend. So it's kind of ironic that this new movie, which does feature a certain hero and villain from that
Hmm.
movie, is the first post-COVID movie to have $100 million weekend, and of course, well beyond that as well. So symmetry.
Right? They're looking at it going, "Yep, that was us. We did it multiple times." All right. So then also going on $1.5 billion. Now, this isn't necessarily the first $1 billion movie of
since,
uh,
since COVID, yes.
is it? Okay.
Yes. And that's
We've
the
had
second stat there. It actually reached that on Christmas Day.
okay.
Um, so, I mean, obviously there have been many 1 billion movies before this, obviously, but
Yeah.
this is the first time we got to that mark again during the pandemic. And again, it's especially impressive because, as we talked about a little bit last week, this movie still isn't playing in China. We have no idea when or even if it's going to play in China, which is
Hmm.
arguably the biggest movie market these days,
Right.
not
Yep.
counting the US or even counting the US, depending who you talk to. So the fact that it's doing that well is incredible. And again, it'll if it keeps on going at its current pace, it'll soon beat Spider-Man: Far From Home, which did 1.13 billion to become the number one Spider-Man movie of all time worldwide. Not counting inflation, but still shows the surge of Spidey, and of course the excitement for this particular movie, which is helping it get to that point.
Hmm.
So
Spider-Man is definitely one of those franchises that Sony's going to hold on strong and be like, this is our money maker. We need to keep this in our wheelhouse."
yep, and obviously they're still coming up with however many other Spider-Man movies they can come up with. We're a month away from Morbius
Hmm.
finally hitting theaters after 2 years. And then obviously earlier this month we saw the first teaser trailer for Across the Spider-Verse Part 1,
Hmm.
because leave it to Sony to stretch that out into a trilogy now instead of
Of
just
course.
a sequel. So, which I'm still excited for because obviously Into the Spider-Verse was super awesome, and hopefully they can
Hmm.
keep that quality up. So, and whatever, and of course, whatever else Sony decides to cook up in their own Spider-Man universes beyond that.
Well, and that's what I was gonna say. At this point right now, they don't have anything officially announced in terms of that, in terms
Well,
of the Spider-Man ecosystem that is you know, characters they have
well,
available to them.
well, they announced that Craven the Hunter movie, if I
Okay.
recall correctly. So I think that's I don't obviously that's not in production yet, but that's coming up. And
Part
obviously
part
they still flirt with their yeah.
Yeah,
So
part of me feels that, Sony going for doing Craven the Hunter is almost the low-hanging fruit of because they heard how many fans were disappointed in knowing that Coogler couldn't use Craven for Black Panther
yep.
because Sony owns the rights. So it's
Hmm.
at least it does more or less sound like Sony's keeping at least their ear to the ground to say,
Oh
okay,
yes.
these guys were disappointed over here, so maybe we could do this because then at least they know they're like, as opposed to going, well, will this person work? Will this person work? Well, they clearly wanted this one here. So I
Yeah.
am kind of curious how that all does turn out.
Absolutely.
All right. So going into number two, I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised by this here. Seeing two coming in at number two, $23.76 million. Um, Now, is this 5 day for the sake of because it released on like a Tuesday, Wednesday thing because of the
Yeah.
holiday? Okay,
Yep.
because I do
So
know that they had that early run as well.
yeah. So the next three movies they all open this past Wednesday, December 22nd. So the top number you're going to see here is the 3-day weekend for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then we just have the 5-day total below that. In
Gotcha.
addition, yes, on Thanksgiving weekend, as you did mention, Sing 2 did have some early previews, of which I went to that back in the day. That made approximately 1.5 million, which is baked into this overall 5-day total. So,
Okay, so it's part of that 39.1. That, and that's what I was kind of
yep.
curious. I'm like, would that put it over 40 or so? That's part of the 5-day total. Gotcha.
Yeah, typically when they do these advanced previews, they'll basically bundle that total up into the opening day.
Mm,
The same concept occurs if, like, you had a movie that had a Thursday preview night. They'll funnel that money into the official
Friday.
Friday
No.
number. So, yeah, the secrets
So
of box office reporting. So,
right. So is the 21 to 35-day window, is that more or less just depending on performance, whether or not we'll see it on VOD come 3 weeks from now versus
yeah,
4.5 weeks from now?
yeah, I put this in there because if I'm not mistaken, this is the second biggest Universal Pictures opening since the start of COVID and when they announced their accelerated VOD plan. Obviously, the biggest opening they had so far was F9,
Mm-hmm.
which had a 35-day window, 5 weeks, because it opened to over $50 million.
Mm-hmm.
And so the structure behind that is if a movie opens over 50 million, they'll have a minimum 35-day theatrical window. If it opens below 50 million, then they can do a 21-day window. And that's what they typically do in most cases, unless they have like an exception, like as we talked about before with M. Night Shyamalan Old, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, since Sing 2 is kind of banking upon this overall Christmas holiday and kind of being the predominant family movie here for many weeks, that's obviously gonna. I don't think there's an actual family movie even coming out in January, so I don't necessarily see them trying to put it out early. I mean, we honestly don't know. Again, as we kind of get to more of this structure where the majority of movies are actually strictly theatrical to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
studios are going to be a little bit more covert with their timing until the majority of its box office has been made. So it could easily be a 21-day window, but I think because they want it to do well, obviously this next week and a half or so, as we still keep going through the holiday season before kids go back to school, um, you know, I think we'll obviously probably be looking at close to $100 million total when we talk about this movie next week. So the fact that it's going to be their biggest non-Fast and Furious hit in the past nearly 2 years, they might have some flexibility with that. But again, we'll see. We just don't know at this point.
I never thought I would utter the words of a movie like Sing 2 and The Fast and Furious in the same conversation.
Well, I mean, you have to keep in mind these Illumination animation movies. They're really big movies for
True.
Universal. I mean, the Minions movies and Despicable Me movies, they make a lot of bank. We talked about, like on a previous bonus show, like how the animated Grinch from a few years ago did incredibly awesome.
Mm-hmm.
They put their marketing power behind these movies, and Sing 2 is kind of showing the results of that. So
Definitely. And I mean, I've never seen the original Sing and whatnot, but I also hear they're not actually that bad of movies either, I suppose.
I would make the argument that the first Sing is probably the best
Mm-hmm.
movie Illumination has made. It certainly has, I've seen it at various places like the State and the Mitchell Drive-In over the course of the past couple of years. So I've rewatched it quite a bit, and it actually does hold up better than I expected. Um, this sequel is a little bit below that, but it's still very entertaining, and I can see why families would have loved it. Again, this has an A+ cinema score,
Mm-hmm.
the second A+ of the month following Spider-Man: No Way Home. So again, this is going to be the big family movie, at least for the foreseeable future here, and we'll probably be talking about it for many weeks to come just because of
We'll see how long you're gonna be like, all right, now Sing 2 again. All right.
that.
So going on to number 3, we have the Matrix Resurrections. Wow, I cannot talk tonight. At $12 million for its weekend, looks like 22.5 for the 5-day because this one also too was this was an early release, but it didn't have the previews like you and I kind of expected, like with the rest of some of the other Warner Brother movies.
No, and so this has been a very weird trend. Is for the duration of the Warner Brothers HBO Max dual release plan, which again, this is the very last movie in that plan, so we should
Hmm.
remind that. For most movies, they would not do Thursday previews for those movies. There are only two exceptions to that, which both of us went to, which were the Suicide Squad in
Hmm.
August and Dune in October. Those are the only two that got that exception. And a part of me was hoping that maybe the Matrix would have those previews,
Sure.
but I almost want to bet that Warner Brothers might have been a little bit concerned about the word of mouth on this movie and how divisive it would be with audiences, which is probably why they probably opted not to do the previews. It would be my guess. I
I
could be
suppose.
wrong on that, but
I do know that having seen the movie, to me it does feel like they're hoping that Warner Brothers is hoping that this has somewhat success, that there's more movies still coming. They just haven't told us yet.
I mean that's it's going to be kind of tricky. I mean, I would not make a guarantee that we're going to get another Matrix movie just based off of the performance of this one because from a box office perspective, it isn't really doing that great.
No, I
Um,
meant in regards to how the movie is structured and how the movie itself is, not necessarily the
oh
box
sure,
office
oh sure,
itself.
oh sure.
Having watched it, and like I'm sitting here going, I'm hoping, and that's where it's like I'm hoping Warner Brothers is trying, in the same instance of we knew in terms of, if you look at like Dune, for example, when they finally got
Yep,
Dune out, Dune was not gonna make money, but they were gonna look at the overall reception, to basically tell us,
yep.
oh, by the way, yep, we're gonna make part two of Dune. Um, we're
But of course, I mean, the fact with that is Dune Part One made a lot of money. It's going
Yeah.
to end up making a lot more money than the Matrix Resurrections is going to make.
Mhm.
So there is that. And I think it's going to be very interesting. Like even when we get to next week's show, I would not be surprised if Matrix actually plummets like fourth or fifth on this list
Mhm.
because I think it's going to drop off incredibly fast.
Oh, I agree,
But
especially with having the HBO access. I mean,
yeah,
just because of with the holiday and everything like that, and just trying to get things done and whatnot. I would love to have seen it on the big screen. I opted to watch it at home, and I think there's going to be a lot of people that if they're going to watch it or rewatch it for that matter, they're going to do it at home. So,
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that where I could easily see like and I even flirted with this theory myself because I did go on Wednesday night. Century 14 here in Sioux Falls is playing it. They were actually playing the Matrix on their biggest non XD screen.
mhm.
And we had between 80 and 90 people in there, I think, for that, which is actually pretty
Pretty
good, I
good.
thought. But there is a lot of stuff that's like very fleeting in terms of like did you see that kind of images where you're kind of like, I as soon as I get home, I want to fire it up on HBO Max so I can like step frame through it or
Mhm.
carefully see what I'm especially when they do like older or younger versions of characters for like a split second in a reflection or something like that. That's the kind of thing where I could easily see somebody going, maybe I should just fire it up on there so I can kind of catch the things that flew by the first time. So there is that.
There definitely is. All right, going in number 4, we have The King's Man at $6.35 million in its first week. Looks like just a smidge over 10 million for the 5 days. Um, I got a chance to see this one. I did go see in the theater, but that's mainly just because, again, like with The Matrix, it's like, okay, if I'm only going to be able to make the theater once over the course of the holiday weekend,
Yep.
I wanted
See
to
the
go see
one.
see the
Yeah.
one
See
I
the one
can't
you
see
can
at
only
home.
see in theater. Yep.
Yep,
Exactly. Yep.
exactly.
Yep. Yep. So we both went to the Tuesday preview for this. And again, this is a movie that was always going to be very tricky from a
Mhm.
box office perspective. One, because it's opening in a very loaded time frame
Yep.
against Spidey and a bunch of other movies. But also the thing I've kind of kept making a joke about, which is the fact that we've been seeing trailers for this movie for the past 2.5 years. A
Mhm.
lot of people have probably thought, hey, did this movie actually come out already? And I just
Yep.
skipped it. So there is that. So we'll see if it has any legs. I mean, 10 million in 5 days is not great. I'm not going to lie.
Mhm.
If it actually gets to like a 30 million total, uh, to end with, I mean, that's not very good because the first two Kingsman movies both made over $100 million back in
Right.
the day. So to have a sharp dive off of this, that's quite a bit. But then again, you know, obviously Disney's kind of been struggling how to handle a lot of these Fox movies that they kind of acquired
Yep.
during the Disney Fox merger. In particular, Disney, a studio known for family friendly movies, may not necessarily know how to make a violent R rated action comedy like this.
True.
Just a thought. Um,
Which is why I'm definitely glad they kept, they're using the 20th Century Studios
yep.
as a means to be able to get some of this content out because, I mean, was it Buena Vista or what was
It was Touchstone Pictures and
thank
Hollywood
you.
Pictures.
Thank
They
you.
actually
Touchstone.
had they actually had two fake studios of sorts to release all that stuff under back in the day because
Yeah, so hopefully maybe that's what they're gonna start doing again because, I mean, granted, yes, Disney is good at making their family, content or whatnot, but try to appease to, more you broaden your audience a little bit.
yeah, I mean it's going to be curious because they don't have that much stuff coming yet. I mean the
Mm,
only Fox movie they've actually started to advertise for 2022 is Death on the Nile,
mhm.
which is again another movie that they basically inherited from the merger. A movie that
Yep.
they started advertising like a year and a half ago and have just kind of been sitting on. So we'll see what happens with that. But I know we're also starting to see the Fox logo or the 20th Century Studios logo on more streaming stuff because, like, Home Sweet Home Alone, if I'm not mistaken, does have the 20th Century Studios logo in front
Yes.
of
Yes, it
that.
did. Yes, it did.
So I think we're going to see more of that. I think also like, they had like movies like that Vacation Friends, that John Cena Little Rel movie on
Mhm.
Hulu. That was
Yep.
specifically a 20th century movie as well. So be very curious how much of that leans toward the streaming side compared to the theatrical side. So
So I'm gonna spin this away just for the sake of curiosity of what you think here is, this is the third movie in the quote unquote the Kingsman franchise and whatnot.
yep,
We have the two Taron Egerton films, and then we have this one here.
yep,
Me leaving this movie here, this definitely, though it is basically, it's dubbed as the start of what becomes the Kingsman, from the first two movies. This is definitely not that same kind of movie. Um,
no,
it
no,
is I mean, if you're going in thinking what you expected out of the first 2, you're not gonna get this. This is a completely different kind of movie, and that being said, that's also something that I think is also going to hurt it. Not to say that this is a bad movie, because if there's one thing I do think is r for me personally, Ray Fiennes is amazing in this here.
oh
Again,
yes,
and I said this to you as we were leaving the theater, is it makes me go back to when him and Uma Thurman did
Avengers.
the movie the TV show Avengers, and I'm like, I want more of that Ray Fiennes because I think that part was great, but I think that as more and more people start to understand that this is not the original 2, I think that's possibly gonna hurt it to the point where if Matt Vaughn would have made the 3rd Taron Egerton one, this might have had better legs during COVID.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, you're absolutely right. Ray Fiennes does hold this movie together. Dajima Hansu, Gemma Arterton, they also do great.
Mhm.
And I think especially with the marketing, I think Disney was kind of trying to lean into the wackier comic aspects. I mean, you see Rhys Ifans Rasputin all over the marketing of the Kingsman, even though he's only in a fairly small chunk of the
Right.
movie. But they really kind of play up his villainous aspect, even though he's not ultimately the big bad villain of the movie, but he's certainly the
Mhm.
most eye catching. So,
Yep.
so you can definitely tell Disney was kind of struggling how to best market it as its own entity, even though it was obviously still trying to lean into the Kingsman brand a little bit. I know they even cut like one trailer where they interspersed clips from all three Kingsman movies to kind of, play it up as part of the brand rather than its own thing.
By the way, this is a Kingsman movie, so no, I would completely agree with that. All right, so then going into number 5, the Zachary Levi-led American Underdog with $6.2 million. I'm not gonna lie, this is doing a lot better than I expect to. And this is coming from the fact that I'm a huge Zachary Levi fan. Like I've been a fan of his ever since Chuck. Um, but this is definitely one of those kind of movies is, you know, the biopic, the sports movies, whatever, this is a very niche movie.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of look at it from a few different angles. First thing I should mention is this is the only movie in our top 5 this weekend that actually opened during the weekend. It actually officially opened on Christmas Day, which is Saturday.
Hmm.
So some theaters had Friday previews for this in the afternoon before the theaters shut down for the night. Some theaters didn't show it, but you're mainly looking at, for the most part, 2 full days of business here.
Hmm.
That being said, last weekend there were some sneak previews for this movie. I know I went to a sneak preview. I know Casey went to a sneak preview as well, and he wrote a review for the site if you want to read that. Because obviously everybody who comes from Iowa is legally required to see the Kurt Warner movie. So that's part. I could almost explain part of the business just because of that.
Yeah.
But
And
also, yeah, go
and
ahead.
I would also wonder too is, I mean, just in terms of the overall numbers and whatnot, is like you said, there was the sneak previews and whatnot, but there was also sneak previews that, courtesy of the movie itself,
Yep,
gave you an opportunity to go see that movie for free.
yep, that's right.
So
That's
then
how Casey and I both saw it.
yeah, so my question is, would be to that point here is, how much was that potentially negative impacting, the overall box office too? Because like you said, I mean, just in our own little small group, there's already
Yeah,
2 tickets, well, up to 4 tickets because they allowed up to two
yeah.
people per per redemption. So that's potentially up to 4 tickets, 40, $50 just off of 2 people.
Well, if you caught it, because the way they did it was in order to have those tickets for free, you had
Hmm.
to enter a promo code on Fandango to get those 2 free tickets. Otherwise,
Right.
they were normal paid showings. So I'm sure some people paid into that. Some people who are more savvy about it didn't. But also, the reason they probably did it was obviously to start the word of mouth on it, to get people to talk about it, to help build up that word of mouth, because you're looking at kind of the nexus of the inspirational sports movie and the faith-based Christian movie, and they're kind of melding them together into this to kind of appeal to both those audiences. And of course, because of its sports focus, it could also be a little bit of a crossover hit.
Hmm.
In fact, I would not be surprised because, again, we're recording this on Sunday night. We're working off the estimates here. I would actually not be surprised if by the time the final numbers actually come out tomorrow, Monday night, that American Underdog is number 4 on this list and Kingsman is number 5 because they're only
Okay.
150,000 apart. So,
Okay.
and I would also bet that next weekend, American Underdog will definitely be at least number 4, depending how deep the Matrix falls. Maybe it's number 3. I
Oh,
think
that's a good
that's
point.
very much on the table. Again, you'll see here I put this also has an A plus cinema score. So between that and Spidey and Sing 2, I
Hmm.
would not be surprised if those are the top 3 next weekend because of that. Because, well, we'll get into that a little bit. But again, I think it's going to have a lot of legs and a lot of good word of mouth. And, we might see its bounty in the next few weeks because of that.
Oh, you've intrigued me now. And but that, what you're saying here too also is what makes me realize that, that COVID, and everything that we're still dealing with at this point right now, is it definitely shows and how volatile things still are right now. Because there's different moving parts. Because like you said, with the Matrix, we have the HBO thing because of, I mean, how people are taking in certain movies or whatever. Next week might be completely different as to what would expected if this wasn't COVID times.
Yeah, the other thing I would point out here too is obviously the biggest clamor we're hearing about with Omicron right now are on the West Coast and East Coast, whereas
Hmm.
American Underdog is very strictly aiming toward the Midwestern audience.
Yeah.
It hasn't gotten there yet, or may not even care as much. So that's where I could see this movie being very resilient. Another thing that actually just came to my mind is again, it's going after the church crowd, but the church crowd was a little bit busy this week with Christmas, going into church services and
True.
family and stuff like that. So they'll come out eventually for it. They might, go later this week, or they might bus up the congregation to see it next weekend.
Hmm.
The more I think about it, the more it's probably got a lot of legs in it. and which is why I think it's going to zoom up this list here when we come back to this next week.
I'm waiting for that first movie where we get to talk where it actually has an uptick from 1 week to the next week. So that
I guarantee you that'll be that movie the next week. So mark it.
market. All right. So with that, top 5 movies of the week: Spider-Man: No Way Home at $81.5 million with no big surprise. Sing 2 coming in at number 2 at $23.76 million. The Matrix Resurrections comes in at 3 at 12 million flat. The King's Man comes in at number 4 at $6.35 million. I always have to do that because otherwise I want
Yep.
to say The Kingsman and I'm like, nope, wrong movie.
Yep.
All right. And then number 5, American Underdog, the Kurt Warner story. $6.2 million at number 5. So that has been our top 5. And I did appreciate this last slide here so we can talk about next week. And by that we mean there's nothing like,
Yeah.
I understand like next weekend is literally New Year's Day and all that stuff. But what I mean, do people feel that, Spider-Man and all that's not worth going up against, that people are going to be out like why are we not releasing anything next week?
Well, I mean, this is often par for the course. Like, we usually won't, after Christmas, we usually won't get any new movies until after New Year's Day. Just because of the way the calendar worked out this year, where New Year's Day falls on a Saturday, it probably doesn't make much effort to do that. And also, as we'll get into, there aren't that many movies in January, period.
Mhm.
One, you pretty much one movie a week is what we'll be talking about. But we'll still look at what happens at the box office next week. Again, I think there's still going to be a lot of shuffling amongst that top 5. I think this would even be kind of a stretch, but I'd also be curious if some of the other movies that opened this weekend that didn't make the top 5, like say a Licorice Pizza, if it would
Mhm.
even have a shot of moving up into the top 5. I'm guessing probably not, but you never know. I mean, again, this is a very busy time with movies, and if people can't make it out right away when it opens, they will definitely get to it, by New Year's weekend or even after that. So we'll stay tuned, but obviously, no new major releases for New Year's weekend this year, at least.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, I'm kind of curious. There's a couple of movies that I'm looking forward to come January here, so we'll definitely
Yep.
kind of see how that all plays out. We're
Yep.
getting and but at least that's what's also nice is that we've kind of made our way through the backlog
Yes.
of all of these movies that were kind of stuck in basically sitting on the shelf just waiting to get released. I think what the last one, I mean, you mentioned it here was Death on on the Nile and whatnot.
Yeah.
For
I
me,
mean,
for ones that I've been keeping tallies of, that's about the only one I can think of off the top of my head that that doesn't because Morbius itself got pushed out and whatnot,
yep.
but that's January as well. So it feels like a majority of that backlog is finally being dispersed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Morbius, obviously, that was a year and a half delay. Same with Death on the Nile. And then beyond that, it's basically like Top Gun 2, whenever that comes out, and
Oh
Minions
yeah,
2.
and
But those
Mission
aren't even until the
Impossible
summertime.
7
So, yeah.
and Mission Impossible 7. So, it's all the Tom Cruise stuff that we can't seem to get, out on the out there.
Like I said before, as soon as Tom Cruise feels safe journeying around the globe to promote his movies again, that's when that's going to come out. It's just a matter of whether that's going to be in May for Top Gun 2 or not. So, fingers crossed.
That might be the one where we're gonna keep going. So, are you gonna release as we're going to the theater to go see it?
Yes, yes. Sorry, we're
Oh,
going to show the old Top Gun instead. Sorry.
actually, I would be okay with that. I've never seen the original Top Gun in the theaters, even when they have the anniversary events.
Ah, yes.
I would be okay with that. All right. So that being said, that has been this week's box office for Christmas weekend. Be sure to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterbox HQ. Follow us there. Be sure to check out the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Amazon, and of course our pretty faces on YouTube. If you're so inclined, be sure to subscribe to our Patreon and join us there where we have all the additional bonus episodes that we have as well. So, any final thoughts here for what we might be having coming up here between our bonus stuff and or what we got? Things you got might maybe
Yeah,
brewing in there.
yeah, yeah. So this week for the bonus, we try to do bonuses that relate to the main backlot show. So we obviously have to do a De Palma December episode to get that in. So that'll be tomorrow's episode on the bonus, and then next week we will do the year in review, the top movies from 2021, because it has been a very fascinating year for the box
Hmm.
office to see it recover before our eyes on a weekly basis. So that'll be fun to talk about too.
It'll be I think it'll be very fascinating to talk about and slightly depressing all at the same time.
Yeah, it's a mix, but that's 2021 for you.
Exactly. All right. Well, that has been the box office, and we will check you guys out next time.
See ya.